Some of you know that I go through great decision-making processes to decide whether or not I'm going to preach from here or preach out there. And sometimes it just has to be from here because I really want to work with my manuscript. Reading from John's Gospel, and in your Pew Bible, I'd be happy to have you turn to page 102 in the New Testament to follow along with me, because I'm going to work a bit with John's Gospel. I'm not going to just work with these passages. I'm going to refer to some other passages. So sometimes it's just kind of fun to see where I am going or what I'm talking about. But reading from chapter 13, beginning with verse 31, and I'll be reading all the way through verse 38, not stopping at 35. The scene is the final supper that Jesus had with his disciples. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You'll look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus answered, "You will lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. Thus ends the reading of the word.
Thanks be to God.
John's chapter 13, if you still have your finger in it, begins the very first verses. "Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end." Jesus, knowing that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel tied around him. Then Jesus asked the disciples if they knew why he had washed their feet. Being their teacher and Lord, he instructed them, "I have washed your feet. You also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." As he finishes the Passover meal, after announcing that he is to be betrayed by one to whom he has given a piece of the bread, Judas the son of Simon Iscariot, he leaves the place where they have dined and he goes out. He continues speaking to the disciples. He speaks about glorification, the glorification of himself and the glorification of God, repeating the word glorified 5 times in 2 verses. It's hard for us readers to visualize just how the Son of Man has been glorified, how God has been glorified in him. And since God has been glorified in him, then God will glorify him in himself, will glorify him at once. It is hard for us to visualize that in the context of what has just taken place, namely the betrayal, and what is about to take place, namely the denial and eventual arrest and crucifixion. We wonder how God is being glorified in a context of betrayal and denial. It sounds almost as if Jesus is seeking to reassure himself by the repetition of the word and the reference to present and future glory. In chapter 13, 2 gifts are mentioned and offered to the disciples. You may not have seen them as gifts. The first was the washing of the disciples' feet by their master, and the second was the new commandment. The first is a gift of example. Here, let me show you how this is done. Serve one another. The second, the new commandment, what will make serving one another possible, and if received and embraced, will be the gift by which everyone will know that they are disciples of Jesus. John's Jesus offers these 2 gifts to his disciples, among them one who will betray him and another who will deny him. He offers those who haven't fully grasped who he is, those who will utterly fail as his followers, the 2 treasures that they will need to go on as his followers in spite of themselves. They'll trip, they'll falter all along the way of that discipleship path. And if in the midst of that they will discover how to use these gifts that are given to them, how they will use and how they will serve as Jesus served and love as Jesus loved, they will become themselves revealers of God. The living God of Jesus will be glorified in them. Jesus was for those who had hearts, minds, and eyes to see the unique revelation of God. He was the Word made flesh. The Word was, as John told us, in the beginning with God. The Word was God, and all things came into being through that Word. What came into being in the Word was life, and life was the light and for all of the people. That Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory as the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. This is John's description of the Son of God at the very beginning of his gospel. This is John's description of the unique in the flesh revelation of the one true God. Down through the centuries, teaching this passage to those who claim faith in Christ is no different, really, than the night on which Jesus surveyed that motley group of followers gathered about him. I give you a new commandment. No different giving it today than giving it that evening. Are they going to be expected to take notes? There are already 613 commandments in Judaism, and who could keep track of those? I'm sure that they were hoping it was short and sweet, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another, but by this everyone will know that you are disciples, you have love for one another. This he is saying to the remnant followers who will falter and fall. Now you, the listener today, may be asking yourself, how is this commandment different from the one Reverend Amanda makes us repeat all the time? That one where we get up and we say, it's 2,000 years old, even before 2,000 years before Jesus. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and all of your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. 2,000 years before Jesus. But this is a different commandment. It commands those who will accuse each other as well as those accused of not living up to their discipleship promise. It commands that they love one another in spite of and beyond their failures. Love one another in serving one another. Love one another in the midst of betrayal. Love one another through the arguments that will follow after I am gone. Love one another through the breakups and divisions in your faith communities. Love one another into becoming the truth and glory of God. Through my love and with my life, I have sought to reveal to you the love, grace, and mercy of God. Be that for one another now, says the unique one. There are some who would interpret the commandment as being instructed to love to the extent of giving up their life for another. But one scholar opened up the meaning of the commandment by changing the phrase from giving up one's life to giving away one's life. Suddenly the commandment was revealed to me in a whole new way. Changing one word made all the difference. Give your life away for one another. That is what Jesus did. We don't know if he dreamed of a different life, a life of comfort, settling down with a loving wife, fathering a brood of children, and enjoying a thriving carpentry business. We don't know if he had dreams of growing old and retiring to a quaint bungalow in the resort town of Capernaum by the sea. What we do know is that he followed the leading of God and gave himself completely and fully to loving with serpent hands, listening ears, and a merciful heart the children of God, with all of their warts and all of their flaws. According to John, he actually called the disciples his little children, not fully matured in their understanding, but chosen nevertheless by Jesus to one day reveal God by also giving themselves away and following, as he said, afterward. To be followers, this new commandment must be in our thoughts all of the time. It must be in our discipleship thoughts when our egos are bruised or injured, when we are angry and feel like insulting someone, or when we ourselves have been so insulted. It must be in our thoughts when we put on that self-righteous, scrutinizing judge's robe and determine who is right or wrong, or whose lifestyle or behavior is acceptable or unacceptable to God. I am sure there were people alive at the time of Mahatma Gandhi and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. and Bishop Oscar Romero and Nelson Mandela and Jean Donovan and Mother Teresa who were critical of them and judgmental of their lifestyles. However, these are human beings who in my lifetime and many of yours gave their lives away so that God's intentions for humanity might be revealed. They gave themselves away for the little children of God. It is likely that in every moment of their adult lives, they knew the same kind of skin-prickling tension that Jesus knew when surrounded by those who could not and would not comprehend his purpose. Dorothy Day, the pacifist founder of the Catholic Worker, would have defined the commandment to love one another as Jesus loved us as disarmament of the heart. It is instinct when we are attacked or threatened to react, to defend ourselves, perhaps even go on the offense. But Jesus calls us to live counter to our instincts, disarming our hearts and our minds in order to live out the commandment to love one another as I have loved you. Lastly, in the week before she died. 27-year-old Jean Donovan, a laywoman working in mission in El Salvador, wrote to a friend about the tension building up in the country in the wake of the assassination of Bishop Oscar Romero. She wrote these words in a message to a friend 8 months after Bishop Romero gave away his life for the oppressed and voiceless poor in his country. Jean wrote, "The Peace Corps left today, and my heart sank low. The danger is extreme, and they were right to leave. Now I must assess my own position, because I am not up for suicide. Several times I have decided to leave El Salvador. I almost could, except for the children, the poor, bruised victims of this insanity. Who would care for them? Whose heart could be so staunch as to favor the reasonable thing in a sea of their tears and loneliness? Not mine, dear friend, not mine." Young Jean, vital, strong, and full of faith, disarmed her heart and her mind for the sake of the children of El Salvador. As it turned out, she not only gave her life away for them, but had her life taken from her. Jesus called his disciples to such disarming love that the glory of God would be revealed, and for the sake of God's people and the transformation of the world. Let us work to be those willing to disarm our hearts in order that Jesus Christ might be revealed in us. Let us be those willing to disarm our hearts in order that others may come to know the confidence that is born in the hearts of people.